All right, you guys, here we go. Welcome back to Seahawks Forever. I am back from the stadium, obviously. The Seahawks complete their preseason today. They go 2-1 in Mike Macdonald's first preseason as a head coach. The Seahawks beat the Cleveland Browns 37-33. I'll give you my thoughts on what I saw, some of the highlights, some of the standout performances, and how those might impact some big roster decisions coming up over the next 24 to 48 hours. We'll recap the Browns Seahawks preseason game, get your questions, comments, takes, and feedback coming up next on this edition live of Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
All right, you guys, welcome. I am Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. Be sure to hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Hit that bell for notification of future episodes. And for all the other ways you can support the show, you can check the description. All those links will be down there. You can also just hit a super thanks today while we're doing this. But whether you're watching on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, send me your questions, your comments, your takeaways from tonight's game, the things that stood out to you the most. And right off the top, the thing that I'm going to submit to you that sort of encapsulates, really, you could talk about this whole preseason, in my opinion, but tonight especially. And I got some texts and DMs during the game, this exact same sentiment from other people that I respect. This team feels different. It just feels different. We can talk until we're blue in the face about how it's just preseason and you can't, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. You don't want to overreact to things you see. Sure, but it's not nothing. And it's the only way that we have to evaluate these players and what these coaches are doing. It's the only way the coaches have to evaluate these players. And while some decisions, maybe all of them, might have largely been made before kickoff tonight, sometimes guys do things in the 11th hour that change coaches' minds. The Seahawks have a roster that's very balanced and very deep, and what it's deep with is intriguing young talent. And they're going to have to get rid of some guys. They're going to lose some players that are going to get claimed by other teams, go on to other teams, and have success. I think that's the quality of the talent at the back end of this roster. Guys like, we saw it last year with, or 2 years ago with Bo Melton, who was drafted the same year Derek Young was in the 7th round. Seahawks didn't keep him in the roster. He went on, did his time on the practice squad, was a significant contributor last year in Green Bay. I think we're going to see some guys picked up that way. Now, before I get into some of my highlights and some of the things I really liked about this game, the one thing that you worry about, and the one negative when it comes to preseason games, is injuries. And there are potentially 2 coming out of this game that could be significant. Artie Burns apparently hurt his foot. I didn't see that happen during the game. I didn't notice it, but he wasn't out there much. I'll get into that in a minute, how much the defense played, how much the starters played. I didn't have Artie making this team, but I certainly would have wanted the Seahawks to bring him back in the practice squad as a veteran that can play inside, outside, and is shown to be adept at both. I could see him making the team. He may be in the team's plans. So certainly something to monitor. And then the big one coming out of tonight is Uchenna Nwosu limping off with a knee injury. That's what they're calling it. He did go into the tent, came back out. He wasn't going to play anymore anyway. And it just seemed like one of those things that naked eye, I saw it, I saw him come limping off, and I hesitate to even call it a limp. It looked to me, the way he was walking, like when you turn your ankle. Didn't look severe, wasn't having trouble putting weight on it. Again, into the tent and out. Mike Macdonald does say they don't yet know, but with 2 weeks to go before the opener, hopefully not something that's going to keep Uchenna Nwosu out. But let's go to my notes. because there were some really, really outstanding performances in this game. And first of all, right off the bat, the Seahawks scoring 37 points in the preseason is not typical. You have to go all the way back to 2017 for a performance this explosive when they beat the Chargers 48-17. Of course, you remember that game, right? Because Trayvon Boykin was the star that day, went 12 out of 15 passing for 189 yards and a touchdown pass. Chris Carson had a couple touchdowns on the ground that night too. This game had a little bit of everything. I said to my partner, I told her that I thought it was one of the most entertaining preseason games that I can remember seeing in a long time. Not always the case. And that kind of goes back to my original point that this team just feels different. There's a different energy. We saw it in bits and pieces the first 2 weeks on television, but it's different when you're in the stadium and you can feel it. There just seemed to have been an edge that was lost the last couple of years. But this team, whether it's just the talent across the roster and the competition for spots and playing time, whether it's training players trying to impress a new coaching staff, whether it's a coaching staff just doing a better job of getting these guys dialed in and teaching them and coaching them up, seemed to me like there are fewer gaps in assignments. We did have a couple tonight. There was one blown coverage, Jameis Winston completing a long pass. There was a long touchdown pass where the coverage was a little soft. There were too many penalties. I think they had 8 or 9 penalties tonight, penalties on both sides. It was the sloppiest of the preseason game so far. And we hadn't seen that up until this point. But it just seems there's a different intensity and different energy with this team and the way that they're prepared. And an aggressiveness, and I'll touch on that in a minute. So we get into it. First of all, the storyline heading into the game was Mike Macdonald says starters would play. Now, not all of them played. There's some guys nursing injuries or coming back that they're trying to be careful with. Noah Fant was not in pads, didn't play tonight. We didn't see Draymond Jones tonight. And then there's some other guys, even though Tyler Lockett, who has been, who they have been treating with kid gloves, trying to keep him healthy. He's been held out of quite a few practices and the preseason games. Was out there in full pads going through warmups in the team portion before the game, as was Kenneth Walker. And yet when the game started, neither of those guys were in pads or playing. Zach Charbonnet is another guy that's been banged up a little bit, and they want to make sure he's right. Didn't play tonight. But for the most part, the Seahawks played the rest of their starters. Even George Fant, who we hadn't seen much of this preseason, started the game at right tackle. And just about all their starters on defense. Trey Brown's been a little banged up. Didn't see him out there. Haven't seen the snap counts. Maybe he was out there early. But Cleveland was a lot less aggressive in playing their starters. We didn't see many of theirs at all. A couple of their starting offensive linemen were out there, a couple starters on defense, but no Deshaun Watson, no Amari Cooper. They rested a lot of guys. The list that they presented at the beginning of the game of guys that weren't playing was about 20 deep. But it was our first chance to see the starting offense. We had seen the starting defense against the Chargers. They forced 2 3-and-outs, and they were done for the night. They almost did the same thing in this game. We saw them early, and they essentially forced a 3-and-out to start the game. Should have been a 3-and-out, but they called Uchenna Nwosu for roughing the passer on 3rd and 9 for going low against Jameis Winston. It was a tic-tac call. It could have gone either way. I know they tend to be a little bit more assertive in preseason. They want to emphasize certain things. Certainly didn't look egregious. Would have been a 3rd and out. They get out of there. It extends the drive, but not for long. Cleveland couldn't run against them. The Seahawks were getting pressure up front, without blitzing really. They end up forcing a 3rd and 11, and then Jaron Reed and Leonard Williams was right there too. Gets a big sack against Winston for 10 yards to shut that drive down. And then the starters were done for the day. At least, the veteran starters. Tyrese Knight, who's starting right now in place of Jerome Baker, played quite a bit in this game. He stayed in. Julian Love, I think, stayed in for a couple of series. Kayvon Wallace, who's now a starter because Rayshon Jenkins is banged up. We don't know how long he's going to be out. He stayed in there a little bit longer. Mike Macdonald did say heading into the game there would be some personalized plans as far as who stays in the game, and there were some guys that got more work. And then on offense, which we're now going to talk about, the interior offensive linemen played deep into this game because there's some battles there. But when it came time for the Seahawks to take over on offense after that first drive, it was all about Geno Smith. First time seeing him in the preseason. First time seeing the first team offense minus Tyler Lockett, Kenneth Walker. Kenny McIntosh started at running back in this one. Of course, Noah Fant out with injury as well, so it wasn't 100%. But talk about waking up the crowd. It's a preseason game. The fans aren't packed, or the stands aren't packed. Not everybody's in their seats. You know, they're getting an extra hot dog or they're getting a beer or whatever. There wasn't the urgency to get to their seat by the beginning of this game because it's preseason. But they should have. And if they didn't, they missed out. Because all Geno Smith did in his one drive of the preseason is lead a 62-yard drive, 5 plays, 62 yards for a touchdown. All of them were passes. And a couple of them were absolutely beautiful. He misfired on his first pass of the game and then completed 5 straight. It was an out route to DK Metcalf, just kind of airmail a little bit. Okay, knock the rust off. You're good. Then he comes back a couple of plays later with a 25-yarder to Jackson Smith and Jigba. That if you haven't seen the highlight yet, I hope you can. It was a little sort of a corner route to the right sideline that Geno had to feather in over the defender, and it was about as good as you can throw a ball. And the catch was just about as good too, because it was over his shoulder, kind of sliding away, reminiscent of the game winner against the Eagles last year in the Drew Lock game to cap off that drive to win the game, where it just kind of Tyler Lockett-esque, over his opposite shoulder while falling away, keeping both his feet in bounds. The crowd was buzzing about that play. And then just 3 plays later, we see this. And I'm able to show this to you tonight because I was able to get it on all 22. Geno Smith to DK Metcalf for 21 yards and a touchdown. DK at the bottom of the screen. It's just man coverage, no safety help. And Geno, just good protection, just lays it up for DK to make a play. Let's show that again. This is the kind of thing that, some of us have complained over the last couple of years that we don't see enough of. Just let this kid, he's 27 years old now, let DK go up and make a play. And he did. And that's how this game started. It was an aggressive start. And again, it felt like it instantly invigorated that crowd because, let's face it, Pete Carroll approached the preseason in a very different way. Not a lot of aggression. Not a lot of deep shots. Vanilla as heck on both offense and defense. This wasn't that. This was Ryan Grubb coming out and saying, okay, we get one shot. We're going to give, and maybe if the first drive hadn't gone well, that Geno would have gone out again. Macdonald did hint going into the game that, some of the playing time would depend on how much they were able to get out of the first few reps. And yeah, they were just like, okay, we're just going to go for it. We're going to push the ball down the field. We don't need to see, we don't have Charbonnet or Walker in the game. We don't really need to, we'll deal with that later. We'll work with these guys on some of those running lanes, but let's get Geno some work. And, 5 out of 6 right down the field, the touchdown to DK, and Seahawks go up 7-0. That got the place lit up, got the place fired up. And it sort of set the stage that big plays were the theme of the night. After that, Sam Howell came in and took over on the next drive. And he had his moments. It was interesting to come back home and take a look at the stats and see his very pedestrian box score. 6 out of 9 for 45 yards, 3 runs for 19 yards, nothing special at all. But if you just look at the box score, you might think he struggled. And there were, he's in there behind the second and at times third string offensive line. There were some protection breakdowns. He did have to scramble around a little bit, but didn't come close to throwing an interception. Looked like he went to the right place with the ball. Had 2 spectacular throws. One, just an absolute seed on an in-breaker to Aesop Winston that got a guy thrown out of the game because he was called for unnecessary roughness, targeting, and they reviewed it and viewed it to be of the extreme type where he gets, or flagrant, and ejected him from the game. That was an absolute dart. And then he had a 73-yard go ball to Cody White that was absolutely perfectly thrown for a long touchdown. Again, the kind of thing we haven't seen much of in the last few Seahawks preseasons. Unfortunately, that one was called back for holding on Christian Haynes. And again, I didn't really get to see the close-up replays. I saw one in-stadium replay, and it looked like a little bit of a tough holding call because he basically just buried his guy into the turf on the play. They call holding, that ball comes back. Otherwise, he's 7 out of 9. Well, I guess that one didn't count as pass attempt because the play got wiped out. So he would have been, 7 out of 10 for 115 yards and a touchdown. Looks a lot different, right? And a lot better. So it felt like a continuation of what we've seen this preseason from Sam Howell. Very capable, competent quarterback, capable of moving the football, moving this team. And we haven't even gotten to see him with all the starters. I have more confidence today than I did when they acquired him that it was a really shrewd move to get a backup quarterback with experience in this league. Not every team has one. There are teams that are going to be shopping over the next couple of days for improvements in their backup quarterback room. Seahawks are pretty fortunate. If anything should happen to Geno Smith, they have a guy that can come in and operate this offense. And some of the narratives from what we saw out of Sam Howell last year in Washington, some of the negatives, because he led the league in interceptions and sacks, and there were a lot of negative plays. I've talked a lot on the show about it, and other people have too, how he just wasn't really set up for success there. Almost a 70% pass rate. Eric Bieniemy just kind of hung him out to the wolves, and teams knew exactly what they're going to face week in, week out against a pretty poor offensive line too. Doesn't look like that guy. And some people took some of the negative reps from last season and extrapolated that to mean that, he's a bad quarterback. And when the trade was made, and I've had people tell me all through the preseason too, even don't believe what you're seeing on the field. He's garbage. He's trash. He's not worthy of being a starter, let alone a backup. They should be out looking for someone else. That's not the guy he's looked like to me in the preseason. I know that the reports the first couple of weeks are that he struggled in practice for the most part, but once he locked in, once the game started, he seems like a different guy and a guy that's capable of running this team. And so it was good to see. Because the alternative is pretty daunting if you start thinking about what if your backup really had a poor preseason. Couple other superlatives, and I talked about big plays, right? On their third drive, the Seahawks scored another touchdown on. And again, this is one of those things where in the stadium, I would have sworn to you that Kenny McIntosh had 3 or 4 carries in this game. He had 1, and he took it for 56 yards and a touchdown. And it was an outstanding touchdown. It was blocked well. He read it well. He cut it to the outside. And then, what did we hear about Kenny McIntosh when he fell to the 7th round last year out of Georgia? Ran a 4.640 at the combine. Not fast enough. That's why he slipped. Good, elusive, deceptive runner, has some power. He showed that on this. He got some burst, ran away from some guys, and then he almost got caught at the 10, and he stiff-armed the defender and finished off the run. Any question about Kenny McIntosh making this team, I think, was answered tonight, not just by where they used him, had him out there with the ones instead of George Holani, the rookie undrafted free agent out of Boise State. And we keep hearing about he's had some struggles in pass protection. Well, a lot of running backs struggle to pick that up. And McIntosh lost a lot of development time last year because he was injured. He showed what he could do tonight. And he also, for all the accusations that he's not that good in pass protection, he had a couple of nice blocks tonight as well. I think he's a guy, he's on the team. I think he can be a pretty dynamic running back. If Zach Charbonnet hasn't shown he can be healthy this year. The other highlight of this game, and first let me talk about this. And then Holani had his moments later in the game. He really took over into the third quarter, early fourth quarter, ended up with 70 yard. No, let me get the stats here. The box score. What Holani ended up 7 carries, 38 yards, little over 5 yards a carry, and a touchdown. And he basically had his own drive at the end of the third quarter. 7 plays, 70 yards. He had 32 yards rushing of that 70 yards on that drive, including an outstanding run to get them down to the 1 yard line. I think it was a 12-yarder where he showed little elusiveness, little deceptiveness, little quickness to get outside, lateral agility, physical, pushed a guy off of him, tiptoed the sideline, almost scored. And then they gave it to him on the next play, and he scored from 1 yard out. So I'm going to show you again the roster projection I did a couple of days ago, if you didn't see that episode, and tell you how I think that might impact the roster. And then the other big play of the night, and this one was so cool, and I don't know if it's going to have any impact on the roster. Maybe it will. Be interested to hear you guys' thoughts. But D. Eskridge has spent 4 years trying to have his moment. Much maligned, injury prone, can't stay healthy, can't get on the field. Sort of, shades of Percy Harvin. It's been frustrating watching it. And then the Seahawks, John Schneider even admitted it, would have let him go this offseason if Pete Carroll had remained, because that staff was just done with him. But instead, this one wanted to give him a chance. And Ryan Grubb liked what he saw. Wanted to give him an opportunity, brought him back on a 1-year non-guaranteed deal. And he's had a couple of moments this preseason, but nothing too spectacular, but he's been healthy. They've been trying him in the return game. And tonight he had his moment. A 79-yard punt return that showed off everything that kept Pete Carroll, positive about D. Eskridge and talking about his explosiveness and what he could bring to the team. He showed long speed. He showed quickness. He showed vision, kind of breaking it back over the right side. And it was cool being in the stadium where my seats are. They're in a corner, and he just came right at us. Once he broke it back, he came right at us, and we could tell we weren't sure it was going to be a touchdown till there was about 10, 15 yards left, because he had to split 2 more defenders. But the coolest thing about it, definitely check it out in the highlights. The Seahawks posted a little bit of it on their social media feed on Twitter, is how the team reacted to it. And they all gathered together and jumped around him, came off the sideline, picked him up like on their shoulders, like he had just won the Super Bowl with a last-second run. Don't know if it changes anything. Maybe it does, but it was a really, really cool moment for D. Eskridge. And what's interesting about all of this is that everything I just described was fun and spectacular and big and aggressive. But the Seahawks got outplayed as a team. When you look at the team stats, first downs, Cleveland, 24-16. Passing first downs, 17-8. Third down efficiency, the Seahawks were 0 for 7 on third down tonight. Not great. 0 for 1 on fourth down. Failed to make a 4th and 1 when they tried to run it. Whereas Cleveland was 2 for 4 on fourth down and 5 out of 16 on third down. Not great for them either, but better than 0 for 7. They ran 76 plays to the Seahawks 45. At one point, the time of possession was something like 16-4 early in the game. The Seahawks only had the ball for 3 minutes in the first quarter. Total yards, 395 to 278. But big plays. Even with all that, the Seahawks had 6.2 yards per play to the Browns, 5.2. Browns passed for 292 yards. They played 3 quarterbacks, Jameis Winston, Tyler Huntley, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Thompson-Robinson had a long 60-yard touchdown pass, I think, over Nehemiah Pritchett. Seahawks did win the rushing battle, 127-103. As I said, a lot of penalties on both teams, 9 for 85 on the Seahawks side, 8 for 98. On Cleveland side, the time of possession ended up being 35.5 to 24.5 in Cleveland's favor, and yet the Seahawks end up winning 37-33. Some of my other notes, some superlatives from this game. We need to talk about Jamie Sheriff. And he was one that I was slow on. One of you suggested when I did the episode with Michael Thompson, looking into the possibility of Hassan Reddick maybe being acquired, which, by the way, I wanted to acknowledge there was and granted, I wasn't the only one that made this mistake, but when we were looking at that scenario, one of the things that made it attractive was that according to over the cap, Hassan Reddick's cap hit this year was only $750,000 because he had 3 void years on the end of his deal. Well, it turns out that Over the Cap is doing some reconstruction of their website, and there were some errors. And Corbin Smith caught this yesterday, reiterated it on his Twitter timeline that Reddick's cap hit is about $14.2 million. So not something I think they're going to pursue, even if they could. Don't think they need to. It was just kind of a fun scenario to play around with, but one that would have been made possible by a uniquely low cap hit. So just wanted to touch on that. But at the time, one of you said, we don't need Reddick. Jamie Sheriff has shown he belongs on this roster. Just give him a roster spot instead. To which I responded, let's pump the brakes. 1 preseason game, he has 1 sack. Yeah, he's shown some cool things, but he was on the street until 3 weeks ago. There's usually a reason for that. He was working for Southern Wine and Beverage, I think. I saw he was a liquor distributor, beer distributor. Wait, I just want to see it. I saw that on Southern Beverage in Mississippi before quitting a few weeks ago to sign with Seahawks. Cool story. And then tonight he comes out, puts an exclamation point on his preseason with 2 sacks. Looks like a guy that can play. Looks like an NFL player. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, this was what Mike Macdonald said about Sheriff. He's a guy that really stood out during the rookie tryout. He should be proud of the way he played tonight. It doesn't exactly sound like a guy that's going to make the roster, but I sure as heck think he has shown enough to be on the practice squad and might have some upside as a guy that can contribute down the road. Couple of other guys that stood out that I have in my notes. I was really impressed tonight by the 2 rookie Auburn cornerbacks. And I just kept thinking, this is why you let the draft board come to you and you don't force things. None of us going into the draft, well, I won't say none of us, occasionally someone would suggest this, but most of us, the consensus was that the Seahawks weren't really going to be hunting corners in this year's draft class because they had a deep and pretty young corner class. And yet they end up taking 2 guys on day 3. And they even said they didn't think that was a plan. They just had these guys rated way higher than they went, and they fell to them, and they had to honor their board. DJ James, Nehemiah Pritchett. James, more of a slot guy, although he can play outside. He did at Auburn. And then Pritchett, more of an outside guy. Was excited about these guys when they were taken, even though I wasn't expecting it at the time, because Brock Heward talked about how the scheme they ran in college was very press man oriented. Fits well with what Macdonald likes to play around with. But some of you had thought that in particular, James had struggled. And there were many comments on the roster show about how James shouldn't be on this team. James shouldn't be on this team. Cut James, keep Burns, which I thought, whoa, let's pump the brakes. You want to cut a 5th round draft pick from this year, who many had graded as a 3rd or 4th round pick, because you think that he's had a couple of bad reps, and you want, in his place, you want to keep a 28-year-old corner who would easily pass through waivers because he's done it many times before. Solid player, but not one that's going to be in demand on the waiver wire. Thought that was a little premature. For the most part, teams want to honor their draft picks, and they want to retain that upside. they're not going to lock into it right away. You know, if you start bringing all your day 3 draft picks into the fold and just if they don't establish themselves as starters, you jettison them. That's you're not going to be employed as a GM very long. Now, sometimes you just have that talented of a roster. The Seahawks may face some decisions on the offensive line. Tao Lamea doesn't look like he's earned himself a spot on this roster, so they may risk losing him, trying to waive him, get into the practice squad. Mike Jarrell's another guy. But in this position, in this situation, these two dudes, they showed me some stuff tonight. And what's interesting is that, you know, longtime friends, both come from the same college. One wears 28, one wears 29. They're both kind of slightly built frames. They have a similar play style too. They play bigger than they are. Pritchett got burned on a long touchdown. Don't know if that was a miscommunication or not. Kind of looked like he was playing catch up. James got beaten on a throw over the middle on one drive in the first half, but then he came back and basically dominated the rest of that drive. And what I saw from these guys a number of times, I think between them they had 11 tackles, a couple tackles for loss. James had a sack, but both of them had opportunities and moments where they came up and made physical plays on receivers and running backs in the run game, particularly on the edges, on the boundaries, where it is the hardest to tackle guys. And remember all the issues that Seahawks team has had with tackling in the last couple of years. Man, go back and watch this game. And maybe I'll do a cut up where I show these 5 or 6 plays between those two guys that I'm talking about. Really impressive, open field, physical tackling, sure tackling. And these guys can cover too. Really bright futures for both those guys. Really excited about what they did on the field. Another one, I thought it was another good showing for Tyrese Knight. Just seems to be around the ball. And when he gets there with a purpose and he gets you down. Seems like a guy that can get to the quarterback. He can pursue from the backside. He's physical in the run game. I know there were reservations about him and people thought he was too raw, maybe was going to need some time. I feel pretty comfortable going into Denver or going into Lumen Field against Denver week 1. If Jerome Baker's not 100% ready to go, I think Tyrese Knight's going to get some reps this year. And the Seahawks look like they found a guy that can play long-term at one of those linebacker spots. That was fun to watch. Let me see in case I've missed anything here. Christian Haynes. So Seahawks did play, as I said, their interior offensive linemen a lot in this one. Laken Tomlinson played the first series with those starters, and then George Fant came out, and Tomlinson came out, and Charles Cross came out. Oluwatimi went the whole first half, and I think a little bit into the third quarter at center. Anthony Bradford played the whole first half, and again, I think a little bit into the third quarter at right guard. And then as soon as Tomlinson came out, they did what they've been doing for the last couple of weeks, and they moved Haynes over to the left guard spot. I think there's some things that are pretty clear to me here. I think Anthony Bradford's your opening day right guard. And whether that's next to Oluwatimi week 1 as the center, or if Connor Williams is ready to go. Left guard, I think Laken Tomlinson will start against the Broncos. But I think Christian Haynes is competing for both those guard spots. Because every time I isolated on him, he was doing something good. That 56-yard Kenny McIntosh run, pretty sure Haynes had a really nice block on that. Haven't seen the replay, but that's what I saw live. He's a guy that can play. Everything we thought he was when he was drafted in the 3rd round, and some of us were fortunate. It felt fortunate that he even was there at 81. I thought he would have been taken higher. He showed. And I think he's competing at both guard spots. And if Bradford doesn't continue his high level of play and improve in pass protection to match his just massively strong and mauling run style, then Tomlinson's going to be on notice too. Now, they love Laken Tomlinson. He was the guy getting the team together when they broke after warm-ups today to go back inside before they came out. He got everybody together. He was getting them amped up. We've heard Scott Huff talk about his leadership, how they need that on that young line. I think Haynes is competing at both spots, but I don't think that we saw enough that he's going to be in there week 1 against the Broncos. That is my personal opinion. Let's see if you guys have anything for me. Let's head over here. Hey, everybody. Hey, guys. All right, scroll way up. Here we go. Tony says, hey, Dan, how's it going? Tony Borges Silva says the offensive line's gotten better every game. I think it appeared that way to me as well. I think some of those things we saw. Now, I still have my concerns about McClendon Curtis. He got beat badly. They did something interesting today. They played him at left tackle later on and Stone Forsythe at right tackle. When I always thought, when they've been playing Curtis at right tackle almost exclusively all preseason, and Forsythe has been mostly more of a natural left tackle, although we started some games at right tackle last year when Abe Lucas was out. So that's interesting. But Curtis continues to get beat on the edge by quick pass rushers and got absolutely blown by on one play tonight. He can move some guys in the run game. Keep talking about it, but I'd be concerned if he had to play on the edge for you. So still wonder if they might be looking for someone at that position in the next couple of weeks. Saw Abe Lucas today. He was out there in a jersey and shorts during warmups, walking around. I didn't see him walking with a limp or favoring his leg at all, but I don't think there's any way at this point. I think he would have had to practice this week. He's going to start the season on the PUP list. He's going to miss at least the first 4 games. And then we'll see where we go from there. But I still think right tackle might be something the Seahawks are looking for over the next couple of days. Rudy Grayling said the first series was so good and so different from anything we've seen so far. I think we have an offensive coordinator now, finally, and maybe this is also tied in with the head coach. That as much as Pete talked about wanting to be aggressive in the passing game and on offense, that maybe his coordinators just didn't have a strong enough vision. You know, I've said this before. I kind of thought Shane Waldron was sort of learning on the job and sort of trying to find himself as a play caller the last couple of years. And maybe it'll click in Chicago. He certainly has a ton to work with there. And that's going to be interesting to watch them progress. But Ryan Grubb, for all the concern initially when he was hired that, college guy, can he make it in the pros? This is a guy who knows who he is. He knows what he knows. He knows a lot. You get smarter every time you listen to him talk about football. And he knows what he wants to do. And I think he's going to be a lot more aggressive. I think you're going to see him push the ball down the field more consistently than we've seen here in a while. And I don't think anyone's going to complain about that, right? As long as the offensive line stands up. And really, there was one stat I saw tonight that all of those the 5 completions that he had on that first drive, 4 of the 5, he got the ball out in less than 2.5 seconds. There was one where he had to scramble. The protection wasn't great. He had to move around in the pocket and flip the ball to McIntosh. That took longer than that because he had to avoid some rushers, but got the ball out quick and was decisive with it. Nwosu going down is scary. I agree. We've got some with some big injury updates we're going to be waiting on the next couple of days. And some of the cuts may be impacted by that, right? And I'll get to my roster here in just a minute, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit further. Let's see. Michael Cam 10, I think right off the bat, we saw that this team just looked different. You can see how the players react to some good coaching. It's sad to see that Pete and his staff were holding us back. Go Hawks. Sometimes the league just kind of passes guys by. We saw it here with Mike Holmgren. The league figured out how to defend that really strictly run, almost stubbornly adhered to West Coast offense scheme of his. And he didn't adapt back to it. I think we saw it with Bill Belichick a little bit the last couple of years. You see it with really good coaches sometimes. This is a young coaches league now for the most part. And these guys are young and innovative and trying new things, and they're thinking outside the box. And some of these older coaches, especially guys that adhere to old ideas and schemes that they're very rigid in their rules, sometimes they just can't keep up. And I think maybe that happened a little bit. And also, and we've heard it this week around Seattle again, because Scott Service fired after 9 years as the manager of the Mariners, their second winningest manager ever, has had a lot of success over the last 9 years. And you see this in baseball, I think more so even than other sports, because clubhouse chemistry is just such a big part of team success that sometimes you just have to change the message. Players start to drown out the message. It just doesn't get through as well. Pete had a more laid back style. Maybe it was just time for someone to come in with some new conviction about how to run things. And I'm feeling it on the field right now. I have a thought I was going to get to, but we'll wrap up with that. Sheriff making the 53. Nope. I still don't think so. I think he'd be a rotational, part-time, deep depth piece. And I think you might need to keep an extra safety if Jenkins is going to be out. If Burns is out, you may have to keep an extra offensive lineman if you're just not sure what's going on up there right now. You may want to keep an extra receiver because there's so many dudes you like and you don't want to lose them. Great preseason. I think he's going to be on the practice squad and might get an opportunity at some point this year. I could be wrong, but I don't think he can contribute in enough ways to crack that rotation right now. Let's see. Tyrese Knight proving all the doubters wrong, according to Rudy. Eskridge trade stock is up from Chicken God. I'm not buying that. I think there's so many talented wide receivers out there. A bunch of them are going to get cut. I don't think there's anyone that's going to want to trade for a guy who just hasn't done anything to prove his worth or value as a factor in the passing game. If you just want someone to return kicks, you probably have some guys in your roster already, because most teams went out and looked for guys like that, knowing the kickoff rule was going to change. I'd be shocked. I would love to get a 6th or a 7th round pick, because picks are currency. And you want as much of that in your pocket as you can get. Like I said, it was just cool to see him have a moment tonight. A lot of love for Tyrese Knight on here from Terry and Michael. Jared, what do we think the market for Eskridge is? We don't. I think his market is a waiver claim. How loud was the crowd tonight, according to Rudy? They showed it was interesting. They showed the decibel meter at one point, and it got up to 100. And I turned to my girlfriend. I said, that's surprising, because the stands were like maybe 60% full. But even Macdonald had a quote. Let me see if I can find it on my Twitter feed here. I don't want to misquote him. Well, I guess I'll paraphrase that, because I don't see it here. He basically said that it was super loud. Oh, here it is. Said the 12s were rocking Saturday night, but I've been told that's nothing compared to the regular season. Yeah, it didn't sound anything like the regular season. But I've said this before. The Seahawks have lost their home edge over the last 4 or 5 years. That Lumen just wasn't as loud, wasn't as intense. And I think a lot of that had to do with just not being able to play defense. Teams drive up down the field on you, convert 3rd and 8s over and over again. The want to from most of the fans in the stands to get up and scream every time as the team approaches the line of scrimmage to try to impact the game starts to fade. The way this team appears to want to play and be capable of playing, they shut down the run, fly around, get turnovers, get sacks. It's going to bring that crowd back in a way we haven't heard in 7 or 8 years. And speaking of turnovers, that's one of my other takeaways tonight is the Seahawks need to cash in some of those. I think they will be a team that forces turnovers. They got their hands on so many balls in the first half and came away with 0 interceptions. Terrell Dodson had one right in his hands. He should have intercepted. Nehemiah Pritchett just didn't turn his head at one point. The ball was thrown right to him. There were a couple other guys that got their hands on balls and just didn't come up with the interception, or were really close, and just kept waiting for it to happen. And it just didn't happen today, but I think it will at some point. Josh Larson says, let's keep Myers as our kicker. Josh, were you one of those that said you wanted to cut him because he missed an extra point the first 2 weeks? Yeah, Myers had a good night tonight. He had 3 field goals. I think one was 47, one was 51, and one was 58, and it was right down the middle. He just absolutely crushed it. I think Jason Myers is a solid, steady, good veteran kicker, and the discussion about whether that the money that you're paying him could be used elsewhere, I think is a discussion for next offseason when the Seahawks are, as we sit here today, over the cap. Let's see. If we get a fifth for him, what are we talking about? Oh, Michael Camp thinks we can get a 5th round pick for D. Eskridge. No, we're not getting that. Refs want to be the star of the game for real. You know, there were some questionable calls, Rudy. I do think sometimes they're asked or tasked with in the preseason emphasizing certain calls and being a little bit overly aggressive on that. And then some of it is just by nature, just trying to, you know, establish that, hey, this is how we're going to be calling it. Maybe that roughing the passer isn't called in the regular season. Maybe that hold on Haynes. Again, I haven't seen the replay. They might have just been calling a little tighter tonight. They do that in the preseason sometimes. Let's see. Yeah, Michael says, if Lucas can't go, I don't know if I want to keep waiting next year for him to get better if we go to a solid right tackle in free agency or in the draft. Yeah, if he's like, I hate speculating about injuries, but one theory out there is that it was a patella tendon injury, which has become sort of the worst injury that you can get in the NFL now. It used to be ACL or Achilles. And now, you know, we're seeing guys come back in 8 months, 100% from ACLs. We're seeing guys come back in 9 to 10 months from Achilles. Patella tendon can take a full calendar year, if not more. You know, and there's some other things we saw. It was a quad tendon with Jamal Adams, right? And he never came fully physically back to where he was with his explosion. If it's something like that maybe if they decide they don't want to put him back on the field until he is absolutely 100%, let's take the extreme example. Cost him this year too. Absolutely right tackle becomes a major, major focus of the draft next year for the Seahawks. Maybe even in the first round. I think anything other than Lucas coming back at some point this year and being the Abe Lucas we saw as a rookie and giving them hope that that's who he can be, that the knee is structurally sound. And all the doctors say he's fine now. He's good. It's not degenerative, not chronic. I think anything less than that and right tackle is a huge need in the draft next year. Absolutely. I know they feel good about Michael Jarrell. We'll see if he makes the roster or if he's able to get to the practice squad, but he's a small school kid from Findlay with a learning curve ahead of him that, he's probably a 2-3 year project. Don't you think? Space says McIntosh with a stiff arm. That was sweet. I haven't seen a picture yet. I want to find a still picture. I would have used that in the thumbnail for sure. Chicken God says, every time I watch Haynes play, I come away thinking he can end up being the best offensive lineman on the team. I agree. It's going to click for him at one point. He's going to seize one of those jobs, and I don't think he lets go of it for a long time. We haven't seen a lot of Seahawk offensive linemen be drafted and become good players, let alone become good players and then get signed to a second contract. Damian Lewis was kind of the litmus test for that, and it doesn't sound like they were ever close to bringing him back, that they chose to let him go to free agency. Charles Cross should be in line to be that first guy, and then maybe Christian Haynes, and then maybe you have, 2 building blocks long-term, inside and outside. Here's another. I'm glad you brought this name up. Chris Neslin, Smokehawk. Mike Morris was everywhere making plays that makes others look good. Morris has had a very strong preseason. He did last year in the first 2 weeks before he hurt that shoulder, had to miss the whole year. He played almost the whole game last week against the Titans, did again this week. He was in there late, and he is just a dude. He's not twitchy. He's not flashy, but he has a high motor, plays with his hair on fire. He's long, and big, and strong. He can move all around the line. That's a really good point. I think he's one of those guys. Maybe he only gets 4 sacks, but he helps Leonard Williams get to 10. He helps Nwosu and Mafe get to the quarterback. Byron Murphy, who we also only saw for that first drive today. They're really taking it easy with him. Mike Morris, a very strong preseason. I think he's going to be an important contributor to that rotation. Rudy Grayling says Mike Morris has gone from bulking up in the 2023 preseason to playing as a QB spy in 2024. Yeah, and they've had him in coverage a couple of times. He made a play on the ball, had a pass defense a couple of weeks ago. He's an interesting player. I think they're really going to move him around. A lot more love for Morris. A lot of you guys in here. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it. Yeah, wait until the home opener. It's going to get loud, says Space. Here's a fun one. Tony Borges Silva, DK or JSN for fantasy. I'm high on both of them. Really bullish on both of them. So I had one of my fantasy drafts today. I drafted 8th in a 10-teamer. And I got JSN in, I can't remember what round now. It was pretty late, considering there's a bunch of Seahawks fans in this league. I think I got him in the 7th or 8th round. Was really happy with that. But in my other league, my main league that I draft on Labor Day, it's a 12-team league. I won last year, so I draft 12th. And in mock drafts, I'm always able to get them on the second turn, the 3rd, 4th round turn. And I would do that all day long. In this league, probably can't do that because we do have some Seahawks fans. I think that the 112, 2-1 turn is a little high for DK, but maybe it's not. It depends on who's there. If AJ Brown's still there, I'm taking AJ Brown first, but I might take DK Metcalf over Garrett Wilson because I'm just not sure about him. I think he's in line to have a monster year. I think Rubb's going to give him the volume. He's going to give him the targets. And they're going to be impactful targets. They're going to be down the field. He's going to have a chance to make big plays. I think he'll have his best fantasy year. The Abe Lucas situation reminds me of the Chris McIntosh medical retirement during the Mike Holmgren era. Wasn't that neck? It was neck, wasn't it? Like a pinch, like a nerve or something in his neck or shoulder. Yeah, it's unfortunate. All right. I want to go back here before I leave you and just check Twitter and see if we've got any updates from Macdonald. Brady Henderson says we don't know the extent of some injuries that could potentially impact a few spots. Safety Rayshon Jenkins from earlier this week. Uchenna Nwosu knee. Artie Burns foot from tonight. He does a 53-man roster projection. So this is interesting. Again, one of those things I didn't see live, but I saw some things about it in the Uber on the way back home, that Wyatt Teller, one of the Browns' outstanding guards, it was a chop block to Nwosu that left him injured. He was asked about it because no penalty was called on the play. And he says, I don't really want to comment on it. Seemed like an obvious penalty. Officials did call it. I don't really want to comment on it. He said, seemed like an obvious penalty. D. Eskridge, squarely on the Seahawks roster bubble, said he went into the game knowing it might be his last time playing at Lumen Field. That's pretty cool that he got to have that moment knowing, that was his perspective on it. Kenny McIntosh says game speed is definitely different than at the combine, referencing his 4.6 yard, 40-yard dash. Mike Macdonald said the plan was to get Geno Smith a couple of drives tonight after he didn't play in either of the first 2 preseason games, but after he saw what he needed to see from the quarterback, going 4 for 5 for 62 yards and a TD pass to Metcalf on the opening drive, he decided to pull him. So interesting. I promise you this, and so I don't want to leave without showing it to you. This was my latest roster projection a couple of days ago. I'm not so sure about a couple of these things now because look at the running backs. I think George Solani, I think they keep 4. So where does that come from? And instead of Aesop Winston, who I've now changed my mind on, the reason I had him in there was because of just some of the superlatives and the things the coaches were saying about his work ethic and his versatility and what kind of guy he is. Maybe they only keep 5 there. So they can keep a 4th running back, or so they could keep D. Williams, who they gave their biggest undrafted free agent bonus to, who some people seem to think is a lock to make the roster. I think Corbin Smith of all Seahawks and Locked On Seahawks has actually said he thinks he's definitely on this roster just as a return guy. Well, Is he going to count against one of your cornerback spots? He's really probably not going to play corner. It's kind of a project there after switching from wide receiver. So if you're going to carry a return specialist, where does that spot come from? So maybe you do just keep 5 receivers. What's the tight end situation? Is Noah Fant going to be healthy, ready to go? Is Farrell Brown going to be out there? He was not in any kind of a walking boot or anything like that tonight, walking around the sidelines. That may be good news. There's some really interesting decisions that they're going to have to make. That linebacker spot. I had posited on Twitter yesterday that maybe John Radigan is in jeopardy of not making this roster. And indeed, he was out there with the third stringers tonight. There were some other guys that got some run in front of him. Drake Thomas got his first run and some reps tonight after finally coming back from injury. Patrick O'Connell actually ended up leading the team in tackles with 9 tonight. Does he have an outside shot to make this roster? You know, the team added Michael Barrett, of course, a couple of days ago. I think he makes the roster. And so if Baker is healthy, doesn't have to be put on the IR, you know, Dodson, Baker, Knight, Barrett, is that good enough? Do you cut Radigan, save $1 million or $1 million plus? And then, of course, since I did this projection, Darrell Taylor was traded. So do they just keep 4 outside linebackers? If Nwosu's hurt, then what do you do? Do you just keep a guy like Sheriff? Or do you maybe comb the waiver wire? I do think they're going to be looking for a defensive tackle. We still haven't seen Cam Young. Haven't heard an update on him. Doesn't seem like he's going to be a guy that's ready to go week 1. You've got to get a little bit better depth on the interior there. I think they're going to be hunting for a defensive tackle in these cuts the next couple of days, either by trading for someone on a bubble or by just picking someone up off waivers. But are they also looking for an edge guy if Nwosu should be out for any length of time? And then at safety, are you keeping Okada if Jenkins is going to be hurt for a while? Lots and lots and lots of decisions to come up with there. Let's see. Let's wrap this up, shall we? 37-33. The Seahawks go 2-1 in the preseason. Their highest scoring preseason game since 2017. Here's the plan. A couple of things. First of all, it was fun I got to visit again with Bryce Coots of the Hawk Zone Rundown podcast. He came down for the game with his stepdad. Got to meet him too. And we got to talk a little ball before the game. Always fun to do with Bryce. We are doing a pretty epic crossover episode tomorrow on their channel. But I may also be able to stream it on my channel, so you'll see it there too. But I'll say it today, and we'll say it a bunch tomorrow. I want you to go over to those guys' channel and give them a sub. Want to get them to 1,000 subscribers so they can really start to grow their channel. The Hawk Zone Rundown podcast. Tomorrow, we're doing a pretty epic crossover. So I'm going to be on with Ryan and Bryce on their show, and also joining us will be Keith Myers and Bill Alfstad of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. So a big roundtable. We're going to break down everything we see. And while we're going live, there may be cuts. There almost certainly will be cuts that'll come out. We're going to be on for a couple hours. So hop on there with us, bring your comments and questions, and we'll be reacting to cuts. And then tomorrow night and Monday, I will react to cuts and player moves, potential trades, acquisitions, waiver claims as they happen. We'll talk practice squad, all of those things coming up. We'll be all over it the next couple of days. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Hit that bell on the YouTube channel so you always get notification of the future episodes. That way you won't miss any of this. Thanks for watching. Thanks for viewing. Thanks for supporting the channel. All the links are down below that'll allow you to do that. Until tomorrow, forever and always, go Hawks.